All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Career Chronicles. I'm Sloan Bartley, your host, and I'm so excited to have those of you who are joining us live, as well as anybody watching after the fact. We're excited to have you here and be part of this conversation. Super excited to be joined by Cassie Crosby. I will do a formal introduction of her in a little bit, but wanted to very briefly remind folks kind of what the Career Chronicles is all about. I am in staffing and I am tasked with helping hiring managers find talent for their teams. And I have a passion for making sure that women have equal access and opportunities professionally, whether that's in the application stage, interview stage, or once it's already in a company. I want to make sure that organizations are doing everything they can to recruit and retain women at the same level as men. So that's kind of my heart behind this podcast. And I've loved being able to talk to different folks about their professional experiences and what they've seen and what we can learn from that. So really excited to have Cassie on here today to share her expertise. I did briefly want to thank our sponsor as well, Spyglass Partners. This is the organization that I work for, and we are a staffing firm that specializes in IT, supply chain, executive searches, and we are now also offering accounting and finance. So we can help staff up project-based and full-time needs for all of those areas. So reach out to us if you need any help with that. And without further ado, I want to give Cassie a full introduction. Cassie is a retired Army officer turned executive coach and leader development consultant, as well as the founder of Iterata Solutions. I hope I'm saying that right, Cassie. You can
You
feel
are.
free to chime in and correct us. And this business is a service disabled veteran and woman owned transformational leadership design firm. She is drawing on her own experience as a senior military leader, as well as her hundreds of hours coaching executives. She works with leaders who are fed up with the inclusion illusion and are passionate about creating genuinely inclusive and equitable workplaces where gender diversity is valued and actively promoted. So basically a perfect fit for the Career Chronicles podcast. She has an MBA in organizational leadership, an executive certificate in leadership coaching from Georgetown University. She is a professional certified coach to the International Coaching Federation and the co-author of My Green Notebook, Know Thyself Before Changing Jobs, a 30-day guided reflection for emerging leaders. So Cassie has put out a ton of great content and knowledge in this space and draws from her own experience as well as those who she's coached. So super excited to have you, Cassie. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here, Sloan. And yeah, I totally agree. I think our missions are very well aligned. And my background is actually logistics and supply chain management. So we have that connection as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And from the first time we spoke, it became very clear that, we both have a passion for, gender inclusivity. And it was an obvious transition for us to tackle this topic of the gender leadership gap. And I love that, you've gotten to see sort of this inside perspective from the military of, what you've observed as far as examples there of the leadership gap between men and women. And you've also seen it in the more corporate world as well. And you see it with the folks that you coach. And you're also coming up with solutions. How can we fight it and address it? So I'm really excited to talk to you about this. I feel like you're one of the experts on this topic. So excited to have you on the podcast. I don't know if you want to briefly share how we got connected, how we met. It's
Yeah.
been a few months, so you're gonna have to jog my memory as well. I feel like I've just known you.
I know it has been a few months. So you had Crystal Hicks from Job Talk
Yes.
on your show a few months ago. And Crystal and I are in Women's Business League together, which is a
I love
business
it.
networking group for women. And I had posted something on LinkedIn where I used AI to analyze an article on the 100 most, 100 best companies for women's development. And basically had just asked, what do these all have in common? Asked AI to do the analysis. And Crystal said, you have to meet Sloan. This is awesome.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
at that time I was kind of just touching the iceberg on AI and have kind of started to
No,
dive
but
in.
that's a super cool application
Yeah.
of AI. What did you find when you did that?
Yeah. So I found, the things that you would expect, which is like, one, acknowledge the problem, right? Like
Yeah.
know that you have a problem and face it head on. Two is, mentorship and sponsorship. And I think people often get those two things confused.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
because like mentorship is when you talk with someone, and sponsorship is how you talk about them, right? And so what some of the most impactful leaders have had in their careers is people who believed in them and talked about how great they were and how much potential they had. And a lot of the time, there's a real affinity bias around who we see potential in. You know,
Oh yeah.
yeah, and so
It's people who look like us and have like, oh, you're from the
exactly.
same place, you're from the same hometown, and we like the same
Yeah.
things. It's very easy for that to happen.
Yeah, and actually the term for that is pattern matching, right?
Mm.
And how our brains understand the world around us is to create mental models that identify patterns. It's very similar to the way AI works. Surprisingly, it was made by humans,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
we pattern match when we're looking for, I was just doing some research even on, VC funding, where women are significantly underrepresented when it comes to venture capital and small business. 2% of venture funding a year goes to women. And the reason largely is that, venture capitalists, much like people who are assessing leaders, use pattern matching. They're looking for
Yeah.
what did
People
success look
like them.
people like them. What did success look like in
Yeah.
the past? How do I replicate that success? And we do the same thing in our leadership models, right? Is that pattern matching? So companies have to identify that just acknowledge I do have a pattern. We do have a certain type that we're looking for. And I
Yeah.
could talk more about, some of the things I think we need to do about that.
Yeah. And I know I have, some things I want to ask you. There's a few things that you've already mentioned that I want to just reiterate that,
Yeah.
are kind of epiphanies for me. The difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I
Mhm.
think I'm always thinking about mentorship. I'm like, I've got to find a mentor and I've got to mentor someone else. But what you mentioned about sponsorship is so important because you need someone talking about you and advocating for you at the tables that you aren't at or in the rooms that you're not in.
Mhm.
And that's been important for me in my career to have supervisors who go to their boss and are having those conversations about the work that I'm doing and making sure it's visible to the folks at the highest level, even if I'm not having the chance to do that. So that's a very important distinction. I wanted to draw that out. You also mentioned the pattern matching. I think it's important for us to remove the stigma around acknowledging when you're doing this as an organization or at the
Yeah.
individual level. I think we all are so, stressed that we might
Yeah.
be accused of doing something nefarious. And at a base level, the pattern matching and bias, it's not nefarious, it's implicit. It's there,
Yeah.
and you just have to catch it and acknowledge it before you start using it to discriminate. It's when you're taking those, sequence of actions and acting on it that creates disproportionate opportunities or disadvantages for different groups of people based on the pattern matching. But it's natural for all of us to do this, to find affinities with different people.
Yeah.
So yeah, what you're saying is makes all the sense in the world. You have to first acknowledge what you're doing and then just keep an eye out for it. So I'd love to, go into that further and hear more of the strategies you've cultivated for ways organizations can tackle this. But first, I want to take a step back and ask you, how did you get to this point in your career? How did you make the transition from, being in the military to now doing leadership coaching?
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to share that. So I actually joined the military right out of high school. I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire where your company is actually located.
Yeah.
So I'm from Grafton, New Hampshire, probably one of the smallest towns in New Hampshire. And when it was time for me to graduate, I had 4 college acceptances in one hand, and I had a recruiter on the phone from the Army in the other. And, I had like a 2.0 coming out of high school. I was not killing it.
Really? That is
Yeah, I was
surprising.
I was kind of misguided, misdirected, didn't really know what I want to do with my life. I was the third of 4 children. So, obviously some like,
Family development theory in place.
exactly. Yes, exactly. And so I joined the Army, and I had never seen myself as a leader again, really was like not doing great things necessarily coming out of high school. So I get in the Army, and very early on, my drill sergeant picked me to be a squad leader. And I was like, that's interesting. Like, I don't know what he saw in me, but okay. And that lasted about 2 hours before I was summarily fired. And never given that opportunity again in basic training. But it did spark something in me because I realized like, oh, wait, someone sees something in me that nobody has ever seen
Yeah.
before. No one has ever told me you have leadership potential. I see this in you. And, that started this journey where I was a print journalist in the Army. I very quickly worked my way up the ranks. I made sergeant by the time I was 20 years old, which is sort of that first level of direct leadership in the Army. And I didn't initially intend to make it a career, but it sort of ended up that way, as things kind of have a way of doing that. And
Yeah.
and with that career, I went through a number of transitions. Most importantly was the transitions that I experienced, um, being part of an institution that is often at the forefront of social change. And so, when I joined the Army, it was under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and women were banned from most combat arms roles. So, like
Right.
infantry, armor, field artillery, some of the like frontline stuff. Um, and so I experienced, when I joined the Army, there was all this stuff going on while I was in the Army for all those years. The ban, was lifted on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And women were fully integrated into the force by the time I retired. And having a front row seat to all of that really gave me
Yeah.
insight into the minds of people going through that, because there were a lot of high level conversations where senior leaders wanted to understand, as we make these changes, how are people going to respond to them? So I really got to see, the face of change and how people respond, and the fear that exists underneath all of it. And then I also really just, I'm quite driven, pretty ambitious, worked really hard. I Because I was not, kind of an A student, like everybody else. I was always sort of a bit of a, disruptive in some ways, like not really going with the grain, even though I spent as much time as I did in the military. And so I think that a lot of leaders saw something in me because I wasn't the person to just say yes. I was sort of the person to push back a little bit and help people think differently. And
Yeah.
as I grew in my career, I made the transition that most people do, which is from, doing the thing, being really good at the thing, to now being asked to lead people who are doing the thing. And what I realized along the way was, it's great that I'm really good at this, but at some point I'm going to get old and I'm going to, have to move on. And who's going to come in behind me to take my place? How are those people going to think? How are they going to behave? What are they going to believe? And so I really started to take on this role of mentoring other leaders. And, part of my job was to develop leaders.
Yeah.
Because I was a woman in the Army, I was asked on more than one occasion to stand up mentorship programs for young women. And what I learned in doing that in 2013, I did that in an organization that was putting women in frontline positions, like women in leadership positions on the front lines, 2 years before the Army fully integrated women. So the officer that I was working for, he was doing things that were like at the forefront of change, in fact, ahead of policy. And he
Yeah.
asked me to mentor women through this. And what I realized in doing that, there's two things. One, because I was mentoring these young women, the senior men that they worked for really kind of abdicated the responsibility to really understand the experiences of these women and how the policies of the Army were impacting their careers, and how being asked to do this thing, which is like put themselves out there and be on the front lines of significant change in a very male dominated structure. Um, you know, uh, so I realized that they really needed people, like not just me, but the men that they worked with, to understand this.
Allies. Yeah. I was gonna
Yeah,
ask you before
yeah,
when the policy was made to integrate women and allow them to hold
yeah.
positions on the front lines, how long did it take, or how did you see before and after that policy, how did that impact women's progression into leadership? Because I imagine if they didn't have the opportunity to be in the frontline positions, it might preclude them
Yeah,
from moving into certain leadership roles, or they might not have the opportunity to show
yeah.
their abilities as at the same level. So did that take a while to change after the policy change?
Yes. And this is where I'm at risk of getting triggered. And, but yeah, no, it actually did take a while. And I think, you've probably seen this actually, and it has to do with like that career blueprint that we say people have
Yeah.
to follow. You have to have had these experiences and this.
This number of years, and we see it in hiring and recruiting all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. And rather than looking at what is the capability and the aptitude of this person, it's more like what is their experience as the primary driving factor. And
We don't know how to measure it otherwise. We're like, if I can't
yeah,
quantify number of years of experience in each title, then my brain is blown and I just can't even begin to try to assess people's abilities and
right.
intangible skills. How do you do that? Yeah.
Well, it's that pattern matching, right?
Yeah. They
And
did what I did, so they can do this job.
exactly,
But if
exactly.
women never had the opportunity to follow the path that you followed, where does that leave us?
Well, it leaves us at the bottom of an opening,
Yeah.
right? And where it, kind of like anyone who knows me who has worked with me in the military was probably like, Sloan, why did you pull that chain? But it's it's like we're kind of getting to the meat of what my argument has always been, which is we have to break the mold. We have to be willing to do things that we've never done before, to think about things differently, to give opportunities where potential exists, right? And to consider that maybe we don't have all the answers and maybe there are possibilities beyond what we're able to imagine. Yeah.
Did you see the military ever do that? Or, and if you don't want to go down that rabbit hole, if it's too triggering, we can talk about
Yeah.
how are you seeing the organizations and the folks you're coaching do that now?
Yeah. So I will say that I did fight that battle later on in my career. I was working, I was a professor of military science for an ROTC program. So developing leaders for the Army, kids who will become lieutenants when they graduate from college. And one of the most frustrating things I saw was that there were no women. Like I was in the most senior position in the organization, at your local level. The person who was like your right hand was your senior enlisted advisor. There were no women in these positions because the requirement that the Army senior leaders had for these positions was that they had to be combat arms non-commissioned
Which
officers.
is exactly what we're talking about.
Which is exactly what we're talking about. And more importantly, what I saw was that there were people who met that criteria, but that they didn't actually have the requisite experience that you would expect. Like the assumption is if you're a combat arms officer, you're a tactician, you've been to combat, but that's not necessarily the case. Like just because your name is associated with that functional area does not mean you have all the experiences that make you qualify.
Yeah.
Just like not having that specific designator, right?
Right.
Myself included, plenty of women who have spent years in combat, in the same types of scenarios and in the same kind of danger that our male counterparts found themselves in, and yet didn't get the same recognition or credit, which I am sure you've heard in every industry, for the work that we did there.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
And I know that you and I have talked a little bit about, and you've hinted at it today as well, that you've seen, to maybe not to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've seen the military and other organizations make this a woman's problem. It's women's responsibility to be the solution. What do you think is the better approach, or, I'd go so far as to say the correct approach when you're, trying to address this inequity?
Yeah. So, inclusion has to be part of the DNA of your organization. It cannot be secluded to, your ERGs. Women in corporate America are 2 times more likely to serve in support of DEI initiatives. And less than 40% of companies recognize that work on performance reviews and compensation considerations. And I did a lot of work with a company after I retired, helping them stand up a women's mentorship group. And yeah, and I kind of lost my train of thought there. Hold on.
You're good.
Yeah. What was that? Can you bring me back to that last
point? So what would be the right way to do this? I mean, I think where you're going is, oftentimes the work is put on women's shoulders to do the DEI or the inclusivity groups, training, bringing the organizational culture forward, but we're often not compensated or acknowledged for that work. So what would be
And
the
the
better
culture
thing?
work. Yeah. And
The culture work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's making sure that organizations, and I see it both as culture work and process and structural work. It's often the women that take a step back and say, is this the most effective way to do this? Is this,
Yes.
we take note of people's emotional needs and morale. Like, hey, the way we're going about this in the staff meeting is actually hindering morale and performance.
Right.
Maybe we should consider this. And that's outside the scope of our responsibilities, but we do it anyways because we want the team to be successful. But like you said, you're not often compensated accordingly or promoted to leadership roles that would be equivalent to that kind of work.
Yeah. And if we know, because the data tells us that diverse teams make better decisions and have better solutions, then what is the difference between having an all-male team making decisions or an all-female team making decisions, right?
It's going to be wrong either way.
Yeah. And what I found with this company I was working with is, one of the women said to me, I want the senior leaders to understand how much work we're putting into this. And I was like, well, how much work are you putting into this? And she's like, that's a great question. So when she went back and did the analysis, her and a team of just a few other women had done thousands of hours of work over the course of a year. And the argument they were really making was like basically begging for resources and some reprieve. And in addition, the work behind the scenes, organization wide to change the culture also wasn't happening. And it was like senior leaders want to bang their fists on the table and say, why aren't more women getting promoted? Well, your culture sucks. Your culture is not, it's very traditional. You're still judging people on very traditional leadership, that career blueprint. You're still expecting people to move every 2 years to be successful here. And that doesn't just not support women. That doesn't support any of us. I come from a culture where we move jobs, moved duty stations every 2 years, moved jobs every, 8 to 15 months. And, it just doesn't do anybody a real service to require people to move constantly. And it's huge transition for your company. It's huge turnover. It costs a lot of money to move people. And it just seems like, if we could just think outside the box and, like I said, like break that mold and just say, this is the career path that's been there, but it's no longer working for people. Our families have changed. Our workplaces have changed. Who works here has changed. Our country's demographics are changing. I don't know if you saw the article, like who owns the wealth globally is changing, right? Like there are so many things changing. We have to make the changes to our cultures, our workplaces to keep up our education systems, right? Like all of that change has to happen to meet the needs of the current environment and be successful here.
Yeah. And I know you're impacting change with the folks that you work with. Are there certain case studies or success stories that you would like to share where you feel like organizations have been able to make real change? I think I'm always eager to hear about these things of like, I can talk all day about why it sucks the way the society and the structures are all set up. But I do want to make sure we're highlighting there are some companies that make even the slightest changes that make a big difference. So do you have any success stories like that you want to share?
Yeah. The biggest thing I've seen where people are successful is a willingness to listen, to really like, sit down and hear what people have to say and not reject it offhand. Because I have seen that a lot where people are like, that's not the problem.
That's not
We
true.
don't have that problem. Right. And so I think it's
so
really
demoralizing. Like I will never bring up another issue again if you say that to me. Like I'm just gonna be like, okay, that's it. I'm done.
Right. You're not gonna listen to me. You're not hearing what I'm telling you. So I think the companies where people are really listening and where they're, bringing everyone into this work that needs to be done to, modernize the workforce. And again, that work isn't just supporting women, it's also supporting men, all genders, right? It's supporting everyone in the workforce who is trying to have a life, trying to, take care of their families, whether that's aging parents, kids, I mean, there's
siblings, relatives of all sorts. Yeah.
Exactly. We all have these many, many hats that we wear. And, I think also it's important to there's so much fear out there. And anytime that we're living in fear, we're often acting in counterproductive ways to the results we actually want for ourselves. And so I think also people who really are able to like check themselves and really look at like, what is this about for me? Like, why am I rejecting this so hard? What is it about this
Yeah.
change that is so uncomfortable? And is it a threat to my status, to who I am? Am I, do I really not think that women are capable?
Yeah.
If that's the case, I think, there's plenty of evidence
There's
out
some
there.
steps you can take.
There's some steps you can take. Like if you're still questioning the value of women in the workforce, I had an officer say to me one time, this was in 2014, and I was in a year-long leadership school that actually ended up leading into another year-long leadership school. But this was during like the height of the integration. This is 2014. Women were fully integrated in 2016. And I'm standing in a classroom and we're talking about the transition, the gender integration transition. And this military officer, at the senior level says to me, well, I just think if women are going to be on the front lines, and they need to prove that they should be there. And it's like, okay.
When did men prove that they should be there? That
Right.
was just
What did you
assumed.
do that first time? Right. We just assume. We're just like, men are the right answer for
That
this.
was just the standard. I don't understand.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, Sloan, there's no doubt in my mind what women are capable of.
Right.
And I have seen it at the highest levels of government, at some of the most intense and extreme environments you've ever been in. There's just no doubt for me what women are capable of.
Yeah, we've been seeing it. I mean, I don't know if you've been following basketball, but I'm a big basketball fan.
Yeah.
And for my entire life, it has been shoved down my throat that women's sports are not as appealing as men's sports. They cannot generate the revenue levels, they cannot generate the audience that men's sports can. And this year, there were, I think it was 4 million more viewers of the women's national championship than the men's. And it's like, okay, so tell me again why, women's sports can't be as valuable as men's. And the reason, for many years, they didn't get to have it be called March Madness. It was just the women's tournament. It wasn't embedded in March Madness. It didn't get the broadcasting and the TV airing that the men's tournament did. And so it's like when we're given the same resources and opportunities, we actually outperform. And we saw it last summer with, the different entertainment options that were available, the Barbie movie, the Beyonce tour, the Taylor Swift tour. The amount of money generated for the economy for women and by women was insane. It's billions of dollars. So yes, I think we're getting to the point where it's like, I don't have enough. There's not a lack of data that shows that women are capable of everything they say that we're not capable of. So will we ever get to the point where everybody can see that and agree on it? I don't know, but we, just have to keep doing what you're doing and, pointing it out to people. So I appreciate the work that you're doing to help people get there for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think, what we're really talking about, and, I hesitate to get too nerdy on it and lose people.
I love your data. I love that you do the research and have the data, because that's what I try to do as well, as to have data and examples to back up what I'm saying. And so I love that you've done that.
Thank you. Yeah. But what we're really talking about is like social constructs, right? Like the everything that we believe in this world. I mean, everything down to like the fact that the sky is blue. The sky is blue because humans have determined that's what the color blue is.
Blue is, yeah.
Right. And that's true about everything, about what we're capable of, about where we belong. And, I can't remember his name. I have this brilliant quote about, he's this British philosopher, but from the 1950s, he said, if we've only ever seen women in nurseries and kitchens, then we can only ever conceive of them that way. Much like the English child only sees the parrot in the cage. And so, and that's why when I say like, we have to break that mold, like we have to be willing to think differently about this. This isn't as much about how we act or behave or what we do as it is about how we think. And I think it really starts there as, changing those patterns, changing those mental models, believing different things about what's possible in the world.
Yeah.
And I just don't think, if you look at to this point about women being such an important part of our society, I mean, if you even look at national GDP, if you look at countries across the world with the highest GDPs, those are all countries where women are involved in the decision making and in the
Yeah.
governmental processes. So even at the highest levels, like diverse perspectives just matter. They just do. And businesses have better business outcomes. They're more innovative. And I think the other part of the problem, Sloan, is not that women haven't always been a big part of our society and a big part of our thinking and our progress. It's that we haven't been allowed to be the ones who had the voice to write the history of this country and of, the progress that we've made and where we are today. And even when I look at the books about war and the books about, people's experiences in the military, so many of them are written by men. And so many of them women have been completely written out of them, even though we were all there in the same circumstances. It's like, there's no mention of the fact, and I get it. Like, that's that affinity bias, right? You're just not even thinking about it. You don't know what you don't know, but it's obvious to me. And I didn't mention this, but my husband and I were dual military. And so we have a very different perspective on things. And there's sometimes I'll bring something up and he's like, I don't understand. I've literally never felt that way. And I'm like, yeah, because you're a white man, right? Like,
yeah,
you're, 40 something white dude. Like, yeah, of course you've never felt
of
that
course
way.
you never felt that way.
Yeah. Like, this place was built for you by people like you, without considerations of these different perspectives that are out there. So
yeah, for sure.
Lots
Think
of
it
work.
a bit. Yeah, lots of work to be done. If we can have one takeaway, I think people just have to be willing to identify that mental model of pattern matching.
Yeah.
And that's all we're asking, is just to stop yourself before you act on assumptions and to keep an open mind of what people are capable of. That's it. And it's really kind of as simple as that. I'd love to know, Cassie, if organizations are interested in working with you or folks are interested in getting coaching from you, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, great. So I'm on LinkedIn under Cassie Crosby. And I also have a website that talks a little bit more about what I do. And that's www.Iterata Solutions, like you see on the screen here.com. Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Yeah. So those are the two best places to reach me. I do post regularly on LinkedIn. I am, always thinking about this stuff and always looking for new ways to think about it and new ways to help people understand the problem. And more importantly, as I do the work to bridge this leadership gap, I also am very passionate about doing the work to elevate the women who are, who have the courage to cross that gap when the opportunity arises. Because if you don't think that throughout my career, every time I was promoted or given an opportunity, that the first thing I didn't think was, I wonder if this is because I'm a woman. I wonder if I'm like this, like
the imposter syndrome.
The imposter syndrome, like, and that wasn't just because things were hard. Like, yeah, those jobs were hard, but that feeling, it didn't just go away when I, mastered the game. It was like those feelings remained. And, it's normal to feel like, can I do this? Am I good enough for this? If you're going into something new. But it's when those feelings persist that it's like, okay, there's a belonging issue here, or there's a, there's something deeper going on where you have someone who's obviously highly capable, but just doesn't see themselves clearly. And so I've actually been creating a program to use AI to help women see themselves more clearly, understand their strengths better. And, because we don't see it ourselves, if the machine tells you, maybe then you'll believe it, right? If they do if you're able to do that analysis and pull out, what are your strengths? Who are you? Like, maybe then you'll believe it. And I've actually seen it work. I've used it myself. It immediately, I was like, wow, I did not see myself that way. Even though everything I've ever read about myself said that, it was like that synthesis of it all in one place that just brings that immediate confidence, it brings those skills to light. So
I agree completely. The more you can confirm the strengths you bring to the table, eventually you get to a place where you know you're the best at that. and you stop questioning. You're like, they're selecting me for this because I add value here and I'm the best
Right.
person on the team for this specific area. I've seen that in myself. I do think it's getting better with each
Yeah.
generation, because I feel like when I have been chosen for opportunities, I've had the sponsorship and the mentorship piece to know that these are the strengths people see in me, and that's why I've been chosen for and it's why I feel confident raising my hand sometimes. I'm like, I will do this project, or I'll take on this leadership role because I know I'm the best at these things. I'm not the best at everything, but here are the things that I really excel at.
Yeah.
So I do think that's getting better, and I think companies and cultures are getting more receptive to it. But we still have room to grow for sure. And I
Yeah.
could talk all day about some of the other things I've observed, but I know we're coming close to the end of our time, and want to make sure I get the chance to ask you my closing question that I ask everybody, which is, when or where have you felt most empowered as a woman?
Yeah. I love that question. And,
Yeah.
I think most people would expect me to talk about my military career, some of the jumping out of airplanes, or, leading, platoons of men, whatever, but that's not actually it. The place I have felt most empowered, Sloan, is when I am in a room full of other women.
Mhm.
Because I have been there so few times in my life. And
Yeah.
now in this new chapter that I'm in this new place, I get to choose who I surround myself with and who I interact with. And there is nothing more empowering than being with a group of women and just seeing the uniqueness of all of us and realizing that, no, I really am not all women. I really don't represent the perspective of
Yeah.
all women. There is such a broad range of what it means to be a woman,
Yeah.
a broad
There's
range.
intersectionality here too, of race and
Exactly.
religion, ethnicity,
Yes.
nationality, all of those things. And
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
Even like femininity in and of itself,
Yeah.
such
Yeah.
a range. And like,
Yeah.
so anyway, it's nice to not have to have all the answers for what women
Mm.
need, because, I don't have
Mm.
all the
Yeah.
answers.
Being willing to point to other people though, and saying, if you
Yeah.
want, like, and not, and I guess you have to be careful of like making anybody speak for the different
Every
identities they
Yeah.
care. Yeah. And speak for everyone who shares those. But
Yeah.
being willing to make sure that in your realm of influence, that you're bringing other people to the table with you and getting input from as many diverse perspectives as you can. That's all you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
Mm.
think as long as you're transparent about that, like, I think you can avoid the kind of the tokenism by,
Yeah.
right, like, you know, being transparent about why you're bringing that person in, and it shouldn't just be because of their, you know, background, their, you know, race, creed,
It's usually
religion.
because you trust that person and you
Yeah,
feel
you
like
trust them,
they're,
they have some value, and they
yeah,
have a perspective that you value, right? But,
yeah,
so, yeah,
yeah,
but I think, a
yeah,
lot of work has been done, and I
for
feel
sure.
really good. I know that, there's some movement out there, and, the space where women have kind of taken a step back a little bit, but I think it's
Yeah.
really temporary as we kind of figure out post-pandemic, where do we all fit
Mm.
in, and what does this all look like? And, I just hope that we're all on board to make changes that are best for, the collective, rather than like just our individual fears
Yeah.
and mental
Yeah.
models.
Absolutely. Well, Cassie, I appreciate your time today. It's been great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us. And thanks for the folks who were here live. And for those of you who watch later, please continue to post comments and questions in the chat. Cassie and I'll keep an eye on them and would love to hear your questions, and we'll respond to them as we can. But thanks everybody for being here, and we will see you next time on the Career Chronicles.